Have you heard about the State of JavaScript survey? The survey results from the 2022 survey just came out in January of 2023. Perfect timing, a great way to start the new year. So what we're going to do today is that Julie and I are going to sit down and we're going to show you how we looked at the survey and had some different conclusions that we came to and the way that we like to use it. And then you can turn around and use the survey how you see fit as well. You want to see what we picked up from the survey? Keep watching. Hey, Julie, how are you?
Hey, Andrew. Nice to see you again. Been a little while.
It's been a long. It is. It's nice to be back. It's been a long time since we've done one of these.
Yes. We had a little hiatus, but we're back.
Yeah, it's been busy with holidays, busy with lots of stuff with work, with holidays and everything. So, we were trying to come up with an idea. We have a bunch of ideas of different episodes we want to do for CloudDev Clarity. And this one, just when I saw the news for what we're going to cover today, that the survey was released at the beginning of the year. Pretty cool they did it like this, or they timed it like this, that I was like, oh my God, this is totally something that we should talk about, because I've got a bunch of thoughts that I'd love to share with this. Not so much I don't just want to rehash what's here, but I'd like for you and I to give our thoughts and kind of opinions on the survey itself.
Yeah, and I mean, we've addressed this survey before, so I think talking about the new one makes a ton of sense. So yeah, definitely.
So we'll have a link to the episode, both at the top of the in the video that you're watching right now, as well as in the show notes, to the previous episode that we did on CloudDev Clarity, where we covered the State of JavaScript survey. This is not going to be just like the last one. I think we've spent more time looking at this and coming with our thoughts. But before we do that, I thought it'd be kind of smart to, maybe some people aren't familiar with what this thing is. What are we talking about today? So the State of JavaScript survey is it's a survey that is put out for all developers out there who want to respond to it. And it's a very well done, well thought out survey for developers, and it gets a really good. There's reasons why I really like it, and I'll stick to that in just a minute. I'm sure you have a similar opinion, or I'm sure you have your own opinions, not similar opinions, but I'm sure you have your own opinions as well. But the idea here is that this is just a way for people to find out, like, what does the community think? There's other state of surveys that are out there. Stack Overflow does something similar, but this one is strictly focused to the JavaScript ecosystem. And I'd extend that to TypeScript, but like the JavaScript ecosystem, including tools and libraries and front end and back end and all this kind of stuff and usage. Is publicly available and we'll put the URL to it in the notes as well. It's just 2022.stateofjs.com, where you can go learn about all of this stuff. You can even buy a t-shirt from them to support them. But hopefully today, Julie and I, we're gonna run through this thing, and hopefully you can kind of you can figure out what this means to you. So I guess let's start just talking about, like, who are the people that actually do the answer the survey? Like, what kind of response do they have there? Do you want to share a little bit of this info with everyone, and then we we'll do like our high level thoughts of the survey itself?
They give you some demographics, and I think that's an important thing, because you need to understand who the people are who are answering the survey, I suppose. So one of the interesting things is that they've almost doubled the responses from last year, which is really interesting. So they had 39,472. My son absolutely loves the exact number, so I'm going to give you 39,472 responses this year. And of them, almost 72%, so almost 3/4, filled out the entire survey, which I actually think is pretty good, because it's a pretty long survey if you haven't taken it. And for everybody to actually go through to the end, it gives you a better outcome anyway. So I think that's really good. Some of the other interesting stats here are the bulk of the respondents are in that 22 to 44 age range. So 66% are in that age range. So I think, we're talking about, in general, working age people. The years of experience, meaning how many years of experience the respondents had, the bulk was in that 3 to 5 and the 6 to 10, but it's pretty evenly spaced between those two and fair, so fairly diverse. Company size, again, equally dispersed between all sizes of companies. And I think that does actually help the survey, because I think how a big company would react to some of the, or, tools they would use would differ significantly from somebody like doing it in their free time or a single repository or whatever. So the fact that we had real diversity across the company sizes, I think, is also kind of interesting. Gender wise, 70% were men. Not shocked by that in any way, shape, or form. I mean, that's just a mere reflection of the industry itself. And 50% were identified as white. So I think, it's a pretty good mix of people. It's nice to see that the responses have doubled over year. So it's getting more popular, which just means that we're getting better data and we can use it with more confidence, I suppose, is a good way to think of that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing to call out too on some of these demographics that you were just highlighting here is that some of the ones that you were just covering, like the age range, like the years of experience, the company size, for all of those that you mentioned, about a quarter of the people that responded did not answer those questions. They did not give any kind of demographic stuff. So, you've got company size, like you said, it was very well represented across the field. But 26% of people didn't even answer that question. Some of the other ones I did think that were kind of interesting, though, is that you've got 20% of the people are in the salary range are between 50 and 100,000 US dollars as their annual US salary. But if you look at the majority of it was, I'd say about 35%, 33%, something like that. Was it 35, 40? About 35% are making between $50,000 and $200,000, but it's still fairly representative. Those JavaScript people that answered this that are making over 200,000, those 3% of those people.
Yeah.
Wow. I had a couple thoughts that I wanted to lead off with this whole thing. And I don't know if you did as well before we start looking at some of these different aspects of it. But I wanted to kind of share why I love this survey and really why I would really like to have something like this in the other areas that I focus in. Like I mentioned earlier, Microsoft 365 Dev. A long time ago, a couple of years ago, I tried to, my company co-sponsored with another company, the state of SharePoint survey. And I don't want to be that specific. I really want to be a lot more generic and just say let's just talk Microsoft 365 Dev. I don't think I'd want to do Power Platform and stuff, but I know CloudDev Clarity, we're trying not to be specific Microsoft 365 focus. We're trying to be more general dev kind of stuff. But I mean, again, that I know that's who probably a lot of the people that are watching this, at least that's our background. I'd love to do that, but I want to share why, when I first started looking at this, I didn't really start until we were doing this episode. I didn't really start thinking about why do I like this survey so much? Why does this particular one so eye-opening to me? And I guess the Stack Overflow one similar, and maybe, I don't know, for the people who are watching this, would you like for us to do one of these on the Stack Overflow survey? Because I mean, it's similar stuff, not the exact same thing, but the reason why I love this is because for me, it helps me get a pulse on what's trending. Things like the usage, retention, interest level angles. So if I'm walking around somewhere and I'm trying to find a place to eat, and let's pick up if I'm in Las Vegas and I'm walking through a casino and I'm trying to find a place to eat. If I saw a bunch of restaurants and none of them had anybody in them, it was all they were all solid walls and doors to come in, but I couldn't see what was how many people were in there. You're kind of just choosing blind. But if I'm walking through down this, I'm thinking of MGM, where there's this one hallway, it's got a bunch of restaurants on it. If I see a bunch of people waiting outside of a restaurant and the restaurant's kind of busy versus the one right next to it is not as busy and you can walk right in and get in. I mean, without really, I'm not passing judgment on it, but that really just tells me I'm generally going to be more curious about the one, what am I missing here? Right?
Yeah, right. No, absolutely. Yeah.
So you look at this and I've seen a lot of these terms I've seen throughout the entire throughout the entire survey. A lot of the products, a lot of the tools, libraries, and stuff. But some of them I hadn't seen before, or I knew very little about. And so some things are kind of like reinforcing. Like, I remember reading about Quick, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, I like the concept. This is kind of cool. We'll talk more about it later. And then you see it pop up, and it's like, okay, where does it kind of fit in the global ecosystem? I know 40,000 isn't everybody that does JavaScript development, but it still gives me a little bit of a bead on where things are. Right. But the other thing that I really like about this, and that I'm going to highlight a lot of it in the things that I talk about, are some perspective on satisfaction score. So I can, like, if I sat down with a bunch of my students, and I was like going, so, you guys are doing SharePoint framework development. What are you using? What are you not using? That's one thing. But when I ask them, what do you like? What do you not like? What have you used and you were not going to use again? Like, a world that you live in, like you spend a lot of time with an SDK wrapper for the SharePoint and Greif REST APIs, the PMP.js library. And, so kind of look at it and go, hey, somebody who's used PMP.js, you've used it. Would you use it again? And I'd like to know that in the cross section of like, and those of you that have used the SharePoint REST API or the Greif REST API or the Greif client, where's your response if you've used all those things? And that kind of is going to give me a beat on like, okay, these people that have used this, they like it, or how much they use it and really not like it. And that's, I think some of the answers that we'll look at here are really going to highlight some of those, like expose some things. Like if you look at the data in a different way, it says something totally different.
Right. And there's so many ways to slice and dice it depending on what your goal is, on what you're trying to get out of it, right? I totally agree with you. I think from my own perspective, I like to also I think I tend to have sort of blinders on because I work in such a siloed sort of development ecosystem that learning about or hearing about other technologies that are coming out or whatever is harder. Like I just they don't come across my radar, and I'd have to make a concerted effort to go hear about what's happening. So this is a way that, once a year I can like sit down with a consolidated set of information and really get myself up to speed. Say, hey, what has come out? What are some new things going on in the ecosystem, and how are they trending? Back to your point, how are they trending? I like to think about one of the ones you made a point about was what have you used before and what do you like, what are you liking or whatever. I find that one a little more interesting when you get to cut it with years of experience. So like if you say, hey, these things are really trending with the people who've used have 6 to 10 years of experience, I might weight that higher than I would saying these things are trending with somebody only with 1 to 3 years of experience. And I'm not trying to be like rude about it. I'm just sort of saying those people with 6 to 10 years experience have a lot under their belt that when they try something new, they'll go, oh, I see. You're going to be one of those that we had 5 years ago. And you know what I mean? They have a different perspective, and probably one I more share, I would guess I'd say.
If I'm buying a house and an 18-year-old's trying to lecture me on the best things to do, and I'm also having a 50-year-old lecture me on the best things to do, if that's all the information I have, I know which one's going to be a little more weighted in terms of like what's going to be more interesting or what I think is more valuable, because they probably have a little more experience and a little more context than I have. So I agree with everything you just said. The other thing that I do like about this too, and I just as a bit of a teaser, you guys have to stick around for this, but there's parts in this that like, there's something that I need that I'm looking at for a project, or like I need to solve this problem, or I don't like what I'm using right now. And I wonder if it's just me, and is there a better option here? And you start looking at this going, oh, I've got like three or four things that I'm looking at and that I'm evaluating. And it's like going, oh, wait, of those 4 things, I probably should take one of those off the list, and I should add this other one on the list and look at them, because this, and if I had to pick one, I'm like, well, this is the one that has got a high satisfaction score. A lot of people are using it. It's maybe relatively new on the scene, but people that use it are loving it. It is growing year over year. But if I just looked at it just based on usage, going, oh, well, everyone's using this other thing here, going, yeah, but they hate it. They don't have a choice.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think 100%. So we'll talk about that. That's in my build tools section, and that's also in a Monorepo section as well. We'll cover those in a little bit, so you have to stick around for that part of the video.
All right. So cool. Should we move forward into like features just quickly?
Let's go with features.
A little something. Yeah, I have something to say about this section. I don't know if you do as well, but
actually, let me one last thing here, just to give you guys a heads up. This is the way this is going to be broken down, and we'll have links in the notes and also below the video for like chapter links. The state of the JavaScript survey is broken down by features, which include things like language, browser APIs, and other features. There's a section on libraries. We're going to probably spend most of our time there. That's front-end frameworks, rendering frameworks, testing, build tools, monorepos. There's other tools listed in there as well. There's usage, there's resources, opinions, and the kicker is when we get to the awards section, because have you looked at the awards section?
No, not really deeply.
Sweet, don't because we're going to look at it together live.
I'm not looking.
We're going to look at it live. Okay. So as Julie said, we're going to kick off with features. So Julie, I'll let you take the floor.
I just wanted to make a point about this, especially for maybe our viewers who are newer to JavaScript development, don't have like a long history with it or whatever. And we've talked about this on previous shows, that a lot of times you'll know how to do something, but you won't know what it's called, or you might not even know that and actually Bob German and I do a show together called Browser Native, where we sort of surface some of these things that you can do in the browser that you may not have known about. And this features section kills it there, because if you go through all the features they list, there's a ton of things in there that you may or may not have known that the browser can do, like natively. And so I just wanted to surface a few of them. I go through it every time, see if I know what each one of them is. Sometimes I like look at it and go, a what? And then I'll look it up and I'll go, oh yeah, I do that. I didn't know it was called that, but I do that. Two of the ones I want to surface is there's a page visibility API. And this API allows your code to react to when the user is leaving the page or going to another tab in the browser. So that if you're if you have some like refresh thing going or set timeout thing or going or whatever, you can respond to the fact that the user is no longer looking at your page and potentially stop doing those things while they're gone. So a very interesting API that I was not entirely aware of. I had an inkling about it existing. I had heard something one time, but I didn't know as much as I do now. So that was a really interesting one. And the other one I wanted to surface. Oh, sorry, go. You have a comment. Please go, sir.
I was going to say, apparently you're not in the minority there, because it looks like less than a quarter of the people knew about it, and of those that knew about it, only 40% have actually used it. So,
yeah,
some people like to say I am the 1%. With Julie, you can say I am the 25%.
I am the 25%. The other one that I think is really, really useful, and not something that I'm 100% sure I would have need for, but yet interesting to know it exists in case, is a web share API. So this is an API in your browser that allows your code to take advantage of the native sharing infrastructure on your device. So if you're running a website mobile, you can use this API to interact with, like, if you're using an iPhone, for instance, and you do the share, you can sort of interact with that. So an interesting one to know about. And I was like, oh, okay, let me file that in the back of my mind in case I have some need for that in the future. Like if you wanted to set up a specific batch of data that gets shared when somebody shares your page, you can do that with the web share API. So I thought that was interesting. And I guess I'm just saying, I think it would be really good if for everybody to just go and take maybe an hour of their lives and just look at all the features and just see if you know what they all are, and just have them in the, just do the little research just to know. Doesn't mean you have to use them. Just so you know.
Yeah, well, I totally agree with that. I mean, I kind of did the same thing, kind of poking around. There's a bunch of them that I didn't recognize, that I had not seen before. But some of them, though, as you look into some of them, it's a little surprising. Like I'm not surprised to see things like the nullish coalescence, top level await, dynamic imports. I'm not surprised that those are in WebSockets. I'm not surprised that those are well known and they're well used. And this is one where I'm always like, developers like going, when are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? Microsoft should totally change like this one product to switch over and just only doing stuff like this. And you're like, really? Because is that like FUD? is that like a tail wagging the dog thing? And I'm not saying it is, but WebAssembly, 3/4 of the people who responded to the survey know about it, yet only 20% of those have actually used it.
Yeah.
Get my microphone. Anyway, so I found that kind of be interesting. That's the only thing I really wanted to say about the features. I'm not as interested on those. There's a whole thing I know about like languages and, to me, I'm not like the one part of the survey that doesn't interest me, I think, is the specific APIs that people do or don't use. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting because I'm usually not looking for an API. But the one that in this, I guess it doesn't really directly related, but like I have zero interest on who's using JavaScript versus who's using TypeScript, because to me, that's like a question. Yeah. That's like a question on tabs versus spaces. I mean, in how many spaces? 2 or 4? I mean, I know heathens use 4, but I wouldn't use tabs. So anyway. Okay, so the next one that we're going to let's go jump into the next one. So let's talk about libraries. How does that sound? Libraries and do you have some notes here? You were talking about, you had some overall kind of thoughts on this.
Yeah, I was the retention versus usage. I think the takeaway here is, based on their graphic, was that there are very few libraries that have high usage and high retention. There is only 3: Webpack, React, and Jest. I might question why some of them are there, but we'll leave that aside. The most of the other libraries are in the low usage, high retention. So they basically say, those are things to keep an eye on, but there's so much there. So much there, and many of them sort of sit in the same then category, like front-end frameworks or rendering frameworks or whatever. So I'm like, it's almost overwhelming. So interesting that those 3 stay in that high usage, high retention. I wonder if it's sort of like the this is what we use, there's too much technical debt to change, that kind of stuff. There's no better alternative. I would doubt that. In at least 2 of the 3 of those things, I would doubt that there's not something better. But you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's just an interesting sort of thing to look at. Like, I don't know.
I think that kind of like what is interesting about this chart to me is almost the inverse of it. So for me, quadrant number 1 is low usage, high retention. This is tech you need to keep an eye on. To me, that's the section you ignore. Right. Because it's like you said, it's so filled with so much stuff. It's like, okay, that's not, I keep an eye on it, but okay, whatever. Then there's the high usage, high retention. These are safe technologies to adopt. Yeah. Okay. But I don't like the conclusion they come to there. Again, there's only 3 things that are there. And you said it was Jest, it was React, and it was Webpack. And they do a good job of kind of like showing, what the numbers are. And the animations they have in the slide are really, or on the site are really, really good. You and I joked about this earlier. All of these, this whole site is beautiful. And the interactions and the visualizations are great. I can pretty much guarantee, when I show this to one person, I go, how are they doing that? Are they using some BI tools? Are they using WebAssembly? Are they using going, no, I'm pretty damn sure they're using JavaScript.
Yeah, I was going to say that. No, but that would be a no.
Yeah. But I think that the one thing that I think that their conclusion where it says safe technologies to adopt, maybe so, but you may not be happy about doing it, right? You may not have a really good satisfaction level. Hint, we'll get to it, but we'll talk about Webpack in a little bit. But it's just I think it's one of those things that you just kind of want to look at. One of them that's kind of funny. It's like quadrant number 4, high usage, low retention. These are technologies that if you're currently using, you should reassess it. There's nothing in there, so we're okay.
Yeah, I know. What's interesting too is the graph there has like a trace pattern for the change over time. Like, you know what I mean? And all 3 of those, in that upper right quadrant of, high usage, high retention, have a negative opinion trend. So I just think that's just gonna say that's a little telling.
It's
throw
really
that out there.
Yeah, you guys, those of you who are watching this, you should really go check this survey out. I mean, Julie and I are trying to show you as we're going through this, like some of the things that are cool about how you can highlight, like I can highlight overreact, and I can see the visualization of like the year of when things were and how things are trending, and like, okay, so we're trending kind of in a negative way, but are we really trending in a negative way? Or like Webpack, like going, oh, it's very popular and it's rising in popularity, but wow, it's taking a very hard, crazy Ivan to the left on a negative opinion here. It's like, what's up with that? Right.
Yeah.
Or so, and then, oh, look, gulp, very negative opinion. And it's falling off a cliff in terms of adoption. So like,
you have to wonder if that might be, if I was going to like assess, it's like, hey, I'm in a company. We have all these projects. We've got technical debt. I now have looked out into the ecosystem. I see all these other things that are way better than what we're using. So yeah, I'm still using Webpack, and yeah, it's, so we've got a lot of high retention and a lot of high usage, but that negative opinion trend is because they're looking over here going, hey, there's this other thing and it's way better and it fixes all these things I find annoying, but I can't use it because I'm stuck. Like that feels like the right interpretation of that.
Okay. So I'm going to tangent
gonna disagree,
off on
people.
us. No. I'm not going to disagree with you. But I'm going to tangent off this. And I know, no, not a fight. Not with you, somebody else, or an organization. But it's funny because I know you and I both have experience of doing SharePoint framework development, and the platform that they've chosen to kind of go with SharePoint framework development. And as a build tool chain, what are we using, and what are the tools that we end up using, and how is it all set up? And you kind of look at this and you're like, wow, we use Gulp. Look at how many people are just running away from it like it's COVID-19. Look at Webpack. This looks like the plague. Like people are trying to get away from this and they're going to different directions, but we're not doing that. And so to me, it's like when you want to look at a growth area, it's kind of hard to sell people when the market is saying that we don't like using this tech, and you're telling them this is what we've platformed on and what we're choosing to stand on. And you're like, I don't. That's not really the direction you might want to really consider. Like maybe you want to look at going at refreshing and kind of looking at something at a different way of doing stuff, because look how we're trending in this other direction. And if you want to broaden your audience, maybe you want to go in a direction that we'll talk about here. There's one tool that stands out. Just it is so clear that is blowing up to me. So
if I'm going to play devil's advocate, and I totally agree, because I do. I feel like there's some bloat and there's some issues and there's things that I don't like and all of those things. But I also think this is one of those catch-22s where you build something and you choose a set of tools, and you can't just decide to change it, especially with an ecosystem as large as SharePoint Framework is, on a dime, right? You have to plan that out. You have to sort of like make a real use case on why that's going to be the best method forward. And I think that's a heavier lift, especially when you get in bigger companies. So yes, I agree that I wish that would happen, but I can also sort of sympathize and see why it's probably not happening, if that makes sense.
I can see it. I can also see a market for somebody building a different way to build out tools that are not using Gulp and Angular, and that are not using Mocha.
When I build my own solutions, I don't use those tools. So I agree. I understand what you're saying. All right. Let's move on before we say something we regret.
Oh, no, I do that all the time. I have a lot of experience with that, so don't worry. I got us. We're good.
You got us? Okay, good.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about front-end frameworks. So what do you want to say there? You want to go first? You want me to go first? How do you want to do it?
No, you go first. I went first the last time.
Okay, so I think let's look at the ratios over time. So whenever we look at these numbers, whenever we look at these charts for like that we're going to go through now, they all default to percentages, which I don't really care for. I like to switch over to the tab of rankings. This one I really like. And because what this does is it shows me like a trend of how things are going. And also at the same time, I can see how old it is. The one thing that this doesn't really do well, though, is when it ranks everything, sometimes you have to make sure that you look at the numbers and how big of a difference it is. So like, for example, when I look at the retention for ratios over time for front-end frameworks, I see the top 4 and you're like, okay, but really it's the top 4 that are separated from 91% to 83% on the current day. And so you're like, that's not that big of a deal. Or it looks like React had this big falling off of a cliff, and it's like, no, it fell by 1%. That's not that's not a drop. 1% is not a statistical. Okay, it's a stat, but it's not going to make that much of a difference. So my takeaway from this, there was 2 or 3 things I found that were really interesting. So first of all, on the ratios over time, there's a framework that I saw and I looked at last year. I was just curious because of the person who was behind it. It's called Quick, QWIK, and it has a very hyper focus on performance. Now, the person behind it is a guy named Mishko Hevry, which is he was one of the main guys, if not the main guy, and the central author of Angular over at Google. He's not there anymore, but he was one of the main guys over there. I had a good chance to talk to him a couple of times, and really smart guy. And he was one of those guys that was like, really smart guy. His idea of what Quick is and why he likes it, why he built it, a lot of really interesting stuff there. So what's interesting about this, though, is that you look at this on the retention side. So the numbers really good, but then switch over to the interest side. How many people are interested in this? And you see that it's gone up to 67%, and it's sitting just behind Svelte and just above Solid. Okay, that's interesting. Now let's look at usage. Oh, well, it's at the bottom of the basement. It's at 2%. So it means that there are people who are interested in it. There are people who know about it. The awareness level, about half the people that responded on the survey, they know what this is. But when I go back to the usage, nobody's really using it yet. And so is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? What does that say? It's just indicative that people who have seen it, they're interested in it, but they're just not using it. And so that says different things to where if you look at this chart right off the bat, you're like, it might tell you to go in one direction, maybe not so. Another one that it does here, I found that was interesting. Look at some of the ones that are falling like rocks. If I look at the retention, look at Angular, look at Lit, and look at how these 2 things, specifically Angular, how much it has fallen from being 6 years ago, being like 68% of the respondents were using it. It's just fallen every year over and over and over to where now it's the second to last one on the list from being the third from the top. Now it's the second to the last. Right. So would you invest in that direction? Maybe, maybe not. What's the highest month? So let's talk about usage. When I look at this, at a chart like this, or when I look at a technology, I not only want to see what people are interested in and what they like, but then I also want to look at what are they actually using? And so where's their community if I need to go ask questions and stuff? React has been, and I know that people have like a knock on React. I know that Solid was a big, people were really big on Solid coming into it and stuff. And same with Quick. Still, 82% of the people are still using React. And that has been steadily, it's still climbing year over year. And it's still just a solid tech to be able to pick. Now, what's interesting then about this, let's take this one step further. And this is the part where I find one of my favorite parts of these charts is go down to the positive and the negative split. You look at React. A lot of people are aware of it. A lot of people are interested in it. And by a significant margin, most people are going to want to use it again. Yes, there are some people who are not interested. Yes, there are some people who have used it and will not use it again. But then, so that shows like, okay, that is more of a safe bet because people aren't too unhappy with it. They're actually pretty happy about it. But then you flip it over and you look at something like Angular and people are like, yeah, that's a pretty passionate, like, I'm not really interested in this anymore. And so I think this just kind of gives you a good kind of indication of, where what the level of interest level is and where you should kind of pick, getting a good pulse on the industry.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think it can just help organizations who, architects, leads in bigger organizations and or people using it. By reviewing this data, they can just sort of help also back up their decision-making process. Like, I think we should stick with what we're doing. There doesn't seem to be any real reason that we need to change. I mean, because one of the things that can be bad about sticking with the technology that's dropping in usage and awareness is, usage and retention, is that your tools are going to start dropping off too, right? Your samples are going to start dropping off. Your tools are going to start dropping off. You're going to the libraries that you might need are going to start dropping off, and that's going to then impact your ability to be effective in it. And so,
that's a good point.
You gotta kind of keep that in mind when you're, supporting something over the long haul. whether you're not your solution tech, you need to make that investment in the tech change simply because you're not going to be able to support it for the long haul.
Yeah.
So that's maybe the only thing I have to add. I thought it was interesting that Svelte, which I did do, I was like, well, okay, what's this one? Had to look it up, and I went and did a little tutorial thing, and it felt very similar to everything else we use. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I mean, it's got some good parts. I don't have any bad feelings, but it was really interesting that they have not only a front end framework in Svelte, they also have a rendering framework as well. So there's sort of two pieces of it, which is interesting. It's it feels like sort of, to use a really loose term, it feels full stack. You know what I mean? It does more. Anyway.
But it's funny you say that, because there's one that we're going to come to in just a second. That I think the React has the same thing. It's treated as two different tools, but Svelte's a good call out because it has steadily been number one for the last 3 years in terms of interest level.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, I mean, and
it was
when you look at usage,
doing that tutorial,
1 out of 5 people are actually using it. It stayed pretty steady. It's not growing right now, but at any rate. Okay. Rendering frameworks. Is there anything else you want to say about front end frameworks?
No. We covered it.
Rendering frameworks. I don't have a lot to comment on here. I have one thing I do want to say with this one though, that I do want to throw out there. There are 2 that really stand out to me: Remix and Next.js. So Next.js is pretty darn popular. The one that I think that has got that I'm really interested in, that I've started playing with a bit, and I really like it, is Remix. The thing that I like about Remix, it's like that Svelte thing. Remix is basically server-side React, but it meshes the two. There's a lot of things that I think it does that it does simplify some things for the developer, in the sense that it creates that when you create a web app, a lot of times you got to create an API that the web app can actually talk to. And that's kind of done for you. So I can actually I can write a function, overload a function that's already there to go get data. And when the page loads, it automatically makes a call back to the server side and that specific method to get the data for the page. And then it can do other stuff with it. So it's like an automatic API, and everything it assumes you're going to use React for everything. So I've used it for one small little project, but I'm looking to use it for some more stuff going forward.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, that's an interesting thing to know about. I don't have a lot of use cases in my daily work type of thing for a rendering framework. It's just not something I do, but I like to kind of know what's going on, right? So it'll be interesting to hear you sort of tell us more about it later.
Sure. Cool. Sounds good. Yep. Let's see what's next. Testing is the next one we're going to cover. What do you want to talk about testing?
Well, again, as I've mentioned before, don't do a lot of testing. We do. We use Mocha, Chai and Mocha for PnP.js testing, and that works pretty good. We're pretty happy with it, quite honestly, for a library like that. Testing the APIs works pretty good. Pretty happy with it. For H2O, I use Storybook, and I have to say I've been pretty happy with it. There's some things that are tricky to do, but it's kind of like that thing, and I've noticed, I've always done this, but I finally kind of put a name on it, if you know what I mean. I finally realized that when I'm learning something new, I need to get to a point and then be like, okay, that's good enough, and put it aside.
Yep.
And then wait a week or two, and then come back at it fresh and say, okay, now I want to challenge myself to fix this next thing.
Yeah.
And I feel like if I've done that, I don't get sort of weighted down by what I've been trying to learn and end up in circles. You know what I mean? Because I have to start my research fresh, and I end up making a lot more progress by having put it away for a little while. So that has happened to me. As you know, I've been working on learning Hugo. That's absolutely been the case with Hugo. And then with Storybook, similarly, I'm like, I wanted to do something, I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, good enough. And I let it go. And then a month later, came back to it and said, okay, I'm going to try to do that thing again. And I'm like, oh, I miraculously, very quickly found the answer, was able to implement it, was really happy with the outcome. I'm like, yes, I solved that thing. And it was like a big win. So I'm feeling like I'm just putting more and more effort into like letting myself put things aside. So at any rate, Storybook is the only of these that I have real experience with, other than the Mocha stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting in the sense that, you've got some more movement, I would say, than we saw with the rendering frameworks or the front end frameworks. There's a lot more shuffling in this one as far as like.
Testing is interesting to me. This one is a great example of what I was saying in the intro, where one thing I didn't say in the intro that I want to highlight is that it's nice to be able to see that if you're using something that you don't feel like you're missing the boat or missing the ship. Yeah, same thing. Mm-hmm. You're not missing the boat on people like jumping off the ship early. And like, I'm sticking down to it. I still love this. I'm going, oh, we stopped using that years ago. I'm still on vinyl. Right. Like going, well, it's coming back. Like, well, I guess I was hanging on for it to come back. It's like people holding on to Bitcoin right now. So yes, like the one thing that I really liked about this is that when it comes to UX testing, so I'm trying to add some of this to a couple of my different projects that I have. And there's a lot of different options. And I know I'm aware of a bunch of options, but I was looking at the different options that were out there. And it's kind of hard to know which one is the best one because a lot of them are talked about a lot. So like, for example, Playwright, Cypress, Puppeteer, Selenium. I'm like, okay, well, which one am I supposed to look at here? And I think that, first of all, when it comes to the usage, that's one thing that's going to be pretty indicative. I see Storybook. Okay, that's up there. That's one I was looking at. Cypress, same thing. Puppeteer, Playwright. I'm like, okay, I'm using Puppeteer right now, but then I look at it and just see that it's like a third of the respondents are actually using it. But then I scroll down a little bit and I look at the positive and negative split. And on the Puppeteer side, I see like this negative spike, and I don't see it being as, it's still a pretty solid positive spike, but I see this like negative spike, and I'm like, there's other ones that I've been looking at. What would I want to change it to? And Playwright was one that I was seriously considering, and I'm just like, well, look at that. Playwright has a very, very low dislike to it. So what's the negative? It's like when we look at like, political polls and stuff, what is their disapproval numbers? You can approve of somebody, you can disapprove of somebody, or you can just be like, I mean, they're fine. I don't approve it or disapprove of them, but they're fine. The disapprove numbers are always the ones I'm more interested to see, because those are people they're going to be more passionate about what they do. And so that one I felt, if you really felt like you're not going to use it again,
well, you got to balance it too with percentages, which they do. So that's good. But,
exactly.
Right. Because if there's a huge number of usage, you can't look at numbers for this. Oh, well, there's only 5 people dislike. Yeah, but there's only 10 people using it. So that's 50%.
Yeah. Well, and this one is, I'm not going to say it yet. There's still like the dark horse in this, or not the dark horse. There's still the surprise to me that I've started to look at more. And then I see it pop up here. I'm like going, okay, now I've got my motivation to go look at it more is even higher now. I'll come back to that later because it's going to highlight. It's going to show up in our tooling in a little bit, just a minute. So, it's there as well. Actually, it's the tool that I looked at here, and I'm like, "What is this?" And I see what it's kind of based on. I'm like, going, "Oh, I was looking at that too." I'm like, "Oh." Anyway, so let's move on to another one. Okay. Unless did you have anything else you want to cover on testing?
I got nothing else.
Let's talk about build tools.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on build tools?
Well, I've been moving off Gulp. I had some external resources that were using Gulp, and I've been moving off of it and moving to just TypeScript, JavaScript with NPM scripts. Yep. And I like that. And it's obvious from the rankings that it's going the way of the dodo, as I said in our notes. It is just, wow, that is some rock sliding. I'm
the same way. I'm the same way when it comes to this. When you look at Gulp, I see the same thing as like falling off a cliff. And I also was looking at this to kind of update. So like I have all my, I use Hugo as well for a couple of my different sites. And there's a whole like client side component to my sites as well, for different marketing reasons or whatever, different UX reasons. And today I use Webpack for everything, and I use to build everything and to, but I've been looking at different options on like, what can I change this over to make it faster? Because it is, it's to the point where it's not as fast as I would like for it to be. And I also want to do better configuration of some stuff. And I just like more control over the bundles and all that. I've been looking at a couple of different tools. I've been looking at ES Build. I was blown away by the speed of ES Build. That's baked into Hugo. So I'm like, okay, interesting. But I see people talking about things like roll up. And then there's one that I was like, well, would this, is Vite one that would be interesting. And the more I kind of looked at Vite, and this kind of goes back to our testing, I saw a Vite test, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, Vite test that goes with Vite. I'm like, so what is it? What's the deal with Vite? And so I started digging in a little bit more. I'm like, oh, this is okay. So I could use this for my compiling and my bundling and my building of everything. But Vite is different in that it builds ES modules, and I don't have to worry about these giant JavaScript bundles. And there's a whole way to go through and to do invalidation of stuff. And they do a different way of doing hot module loading, hot module replacement. I was like, this is really interesting. So that's where I started like digging more into this, going, I was impressed by the speed of it, but I started to get, it was kind of more reassuring to see that, everyone else is running away from these other tools that I'm currently using, going, okay, that's validation that I'm not the only one that feels this way. Yeah. Yep. And then I go through again, like, all right, well, would I be going in the right direction? So again, I scroll down to the positive negative split on build tools. I look at Gulp and I'm like, I don't feel that negative about it. I'm not thrilled with it, but I don't feel like I'm not going to use it again. Sure. I would prefer not to. Webpack, I'm like, well, I don't feel that bad about it. It works, but I understand it. And so whatever. And then I look at Vite and I'm like, holy crap, people who use it really, really like it. And there's very few who really, really don't. I'm like,
and its usage has shot up.
It's exploded.
Like crazy. Yeah.
It's exploded. And there's a whole testing model to go along with it as well. And I was like, you know what?
And that may be why too. It's a correlation type of thing.
Agreed. And that's where like I was kind of looking between like ES Build and Vite. And I'm like, you know what? Okay. So that to me, looking at this survey was telling me, based on what everybody else said, going, all right, you know what? I'm going to be a bit of a lemming here. But if everybody else likes it that much and uses it that much, I'm standing outside the restaurant. I'm looking at a couple of different options, and there's a long wait list. And I've got an option to jump in right now and skip the wait list and get into that crowd, go sit at the bar as a one top. Yeah. I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thinking about my favorite
what's
restaurant
really interesting about this too, and something I've been kind of just reading about, I don't have a lot of expertise, so I don't want to imply that I do, but something I've been reading a lot about is kind of that, common JS modules and ES modules, and sort of the Node.js war on that. Because so to just level set, Node.js by default is common JS modules, builds common JS modules. Webpack by default in its solution builds common JS modules by default. It can do all the other things, so I'm not trying to say it can't, but by default that's what it does, which made total sense given how Webpack's been around for a long time. Node.js has been around for a long time, so totally makes sense. Where rollup ES Build comes into play is they are native ES modules from the get-go, and so if you're trying to do ES modules, I feel like there's a part of my mind that's going, why would I go and use a tool like Webpack if I don't have to, when it is slower, if my outcome wants to be ES modules, why don't I go to a tool that's going to give me that from the get-go and is going to be faster? So to your point about ES Build, Rollup, Vite, they're all ES modules first, right? And, you and I had a separate side conversation about, possibility of even new ways of replacing Node with things that are ES module first. And I don't want to get into that, but the point being is there's that whole shift in the ecosystem since ES modules became a thing. And so that's just that changing landscape of everything. But at the very least, yes, I have in my solutions that I am building that are not SharePoint Framework, where I am stuck with Webpack because that's what it uses, I have started playing around with some of these other ones. I've done Rollup. ES Build is next on my try list. I have not worked with Vite, but I'm interested now, especially because you brought it up in a way that I hadn't really thought about. I'm not sure it fits into what I need because I don't know if I need that kind of testing piece of it. So maybe it's not necessary, and maybe it's like, I need a screwdriver, and I went out and bought an entire 98 pack of bits with an electric drill, when I only needed a screwdriver. So I want to be careful about what I take on for that reason, but it's just an interesting thing to think about that I think is sort of not really addressed.
Thank you very much for correcting the way that I pronounce Vite, which is really Vite.
Is it? I don't know. Maybe I just mispronounced it.
No, you were right. You said that, and I was like, crap, I read that too, and I knew that. I've been pronouncing it as Vite, and I remember reading when I was doing the research, looking at this, and I was digging into more. Somebody actually pronounced on the site. It actually is. It did the whole pronounce. I was like, oh, my bad. So another one too that I thought that I wanted to throw out there was that I thought was interesting was about monorepos. This goes back to an example, and I know this is going to be. I wonder how many people, one of our listeners, are actually interested in this. But I do have a monorepo that I have to maintain, and I've been struggling on which the best way to do this. This is where I find that the different pivots on the charts that we have are really, really useful, because when you look at the rankings, and they've only been asking this question now for 2 years, so it's not very indicative. It kind of looks more like a subway line than it does real trends. But when you look at it defaults to retention, it doesn't say a whole lot to me. When I look at the interest level, Turbo Repo was one of the ones that I was looking at going, okay, most people are interested in Turbo Repo when it comes to usage. It's still not heavily used. Yarn workspaces are more, but I mean, the numbers are pretty small. So I'm not thinking it's that much of a difference. But when I scroll down a little bit and I look a little bit deeper in this, there's one that I recognize. It's called Rush. It was by some guys at Microsoft to build their own monorepo tool because they didn't like the tools that were out there at the time, Lerna, which was Lerna. And you can see that, nobody's using Rush. The people who have used Rush, the numbers are very small when you look at the positive negative split. So I'm just okay, there's other options that are out there that people are happier with and that are using to go through and to build different tools. And that also carries over for me. That also carries over to the other tools. You said just a minute ago, you were talking about, moving off Node and moving on to something else here. And, we both listened to, thanks to you sharing it with me. There was an interview with the guy who was the original author of Node, a guy named Ryan. And he's now working on something else that is, instead of based on CommonJS, it's based more on ES modules, but it's also not pinned to be it feels like Node.js feels like a separate version of JavaScript from what we use in the browser, where the project he's working on called Dino is
Dino, I think. Yeah.
Dino, yeah. Where Dino is supposed to be the more popular or the more pure play of working with JavaScript that we work with in browser. And conceptually, I like that. But I was I don't really know a ton about this. And it just makes me feel a little bit better when I look at, hey, the number of survey respondents, how many people even knew what Dino was?
Right.
8%.
Right.
But even better, this is the part that's funny to me. Microsoft was touting when they built their own JavaScript runtime that they swapped out for, they're like, oh, we're going to use our JavaScript runtime. It's the best one. We're going to use this one instead of using V8 that Google did for the Chromium, or that the Chromium team used. We're going to be called Chakra. Nobody uses it. No one uses. Okay, not no one. 113 people out of 40,000 are actually aware of it.
Yep. Yeah, I think, but just to finalize your thought on Dino, it just did come out in barely a month or two ago. It came out for release. So it's really new. I think if you and I had a thing we could say for the future, we should put a pin and look at that and see how it grows, because I'll be interested. We have sort of different views on it, I think, or we'll see. But I'll be interested to see what happens with it over time, because I think it's an interesting play. So we'll see.
I don't disagree with that. Okay. What do we want to go do? What do we do next? Oh, resources.
Yes.
What do you want to say about resources?
Well, the only thing I had, I thought it was interesting. I glanced at it because I was the things I was really interested in were in the library section and whatever. But I wanted to glance at resources because this is something that you and I are building right now, a resource. So I just kind of wanted to see what the trends are, or what, things were happening and how people were doing things. I thought it was interesting that of the self-directed learning, 74% of people were doing self-directed learning. Online free learning came in next. Videos and screencasts came in next. And books in fourth just kind of threw me. I was like, wow, still with the books. Interesting. Very interesting. But those top four like make up the vast majority of how people like learn. And I thought that was really interesting just to take in, especially as people who put out content, you know what I mean? Like mentoring really low, podcasts really low. Thought that was interesting. You know why? Because it doesn't really match, I think, with what we're doing. It's a hard thing to listen to. Higher education, on the job training, you know, those kinds of things.
Think that podcasts help in terms of awareness, but I don't think they help in terms of learning. So like I've never looked at Dino, but I know about it because of a podcast.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
So coding for podcasts doesn't make sense to me. It was interesting. I had somebody I've known for many, many years reached out to me over this past weekend on Facebook and was asking me about this whole book project and looking for like an agent to go through this book project. And he's like, "Are you doing any more books?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Why aren't you doing more books?" And I was like, I mean, I don't have anything against books, but I just prefer the other options that are available to me. And with this whole section is like written for me, for my business and what I do as an info product person.
It is. Yeah.
So like the self-directed learning, online courses, videos and screencasts. And then it's interesting to kind of scroll down a little bit farther. What sites and courses, sites/courses do you consult with when you're learning about stuff? And my goodness, this was, aside from, hey, we go to Stack Overflow, we go to MDN. I'm not surprised. We go to W3 Schools. That's good because at least MDN and W3 Schools is very much like documentation. It's not so much like getting help, but it's docs. That's good. Yeah. That's web docs. That's exactly how it should be. But I found other ones where people like talk so great about certain things. And I'm like, are you serious? Like everyone goes crazy about Pluralsight. You're at 5%. There are Stack Overflow, you got 90, or even like free CodeCamper, web dev are 31%. Then the part that gets, and how did I learn? It's funny because there's one guy in here, or LinkedIn Learning, less than 3%. There's one guy in here that I used to learn React. And not only is his name listed in there in that list, but so is one of his courses. So Kent C. Dodds, his course, Epic React, which is a great React course. And then his, he doesn't have it in here, but it was referenced in the testing section, is a library called Testing React, Testing Library is something that he's got a strong momentum behind. Yeah. The last one that I'll throw out here that as some really where my interest level is right now, a section on video creators. So ideas of people to go like follow on YouTube, like see how they do certain things. Why are they rated so highly? Or podcasts you can listen to. What should be listening? What podcasts or programming related podcasts should you listen to? Had you ever heard of a podcast called Syntax?
No.
How about HTTP 203?
That's it. Out of those.
that one's pretty far down there, right? But like, and the changelog, that's on my list.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. And what people do you follow on Mastodon, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Google, on YouTube? On YouTube. This list of like different people that you can go follow and that you can. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's super, super useful. And I need to dig into this a little bit more in my free time.
Did you find it was kind of interesting that a little bit farther down, there's a section on other surveys that people watch? State of CSS. State of CSS.
Yes. I knew about that one. Stefan has done that one.
But this one's interesting, right? We're talking about JavaScript developers, right? This is a state of JavaScript. 64% of the respondents knew about the state of JavaScript, the state of CSS.
Yeah.
But less than 50% knew about the Stack Overflow annual survey.
I didn't know about it.
You didn't know about the Stack Overflow survey? How are you doing this podcast? I'm just kidding. Who are you? Who do
worthy. I'm not worthy.
I'm just kidding.
I only have so many hours in my day.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like this one is pretty interesting. So,
and I knew about state of CSS.
Well, yeah, that it would. This one's interesting though. This one's pretty interesting. So that's pretty cool.
Okay, you wanted to do awards.
Well, no, there's two things I want to do really quick. So one on the opinions, right? One thing about the opinions that I thought was interesting is if we scroll down, the one section that I thought that I wanted to call out here was, what do you feel is currently missing from JavaScript? Yeah,
this one was like, okay, yeah. What do you see that's interesting?
So I thought this was really good. The top two I found really interesting. Number one, static typing. Like, okay. Technically, I guess that's correct, but that's called TypeScript.
Yep. Yeah.
And the other one that they say, which I heard this debate about, should we have typing in JavaScript? And I'm like, but that's exactly what TypeScript is. So the other one that I thought was interesting is a standard library. And this is about the fight with, or the issues that we have with NPM and the dependency chains and all that kind of stuff. And you look at other languages and platforms like Go or like Rust or like those, and do they have a standard library? They do, but then people complain about the standard library. So it's kind of like, do you want your cake? Or do you want to eat your cake?
This was something that Dino Ryan, the Dino guy, sort of brought up too, is like, I think we should have standard libraries, and I'm going to have standard libraries, and that's what we're going to do. Doesn't mean you can't use your own, but we're going to have some standards. This really falls into the you want your cake and eat it too. So it's fine with you until you're not happy with one of the standards, and then you're bitching about it at all. So, it's tricky. I will say it's tricky because, I mean, you have to rely on people maintaining their community projects, whatever, because it's a free ecosystem for the most part. And you know what free means? You get what you get. You don't get upset.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about before we go into awards?
No. Am I clicking on this for the first time? Yes, I am.
You are. Okay. So let's do this together, right?
Okay. Yep.
So most adopted feature. So that's the list at the very beginning. What do you think that is?
Oh,
let's just click on it. Let's just get your reaction.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, for frick's sake, really? Top level of weight? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Now, this is where I think the survey got really interesting because, and for me, it was very, very timely. Most adopted technology.
Okay.
It's brand new and it's Vite. It's only 2 years old. It's Vite. And
that's interesting. So that really supports what you were saying earlier too, is like, yep. All right. Well, you're going to get back to me on that and I'll decide then after you do all the work.
We're not done yet.
Okay. Highest retention.
Sky high again. 98% retention ratio. And what's number two? Testing library for it. Or you're talking about the Vite test, right?
Yeah.
Highest level of interest.
Vite. Oh my God, this thing is taking a run. It's getting all the awards.
Yeah. Okay. Now the last one.
Write-ins.
Most
write-ins.
Interesting. Clearly, Vite is not going to be here. But
yeah, right. I don't even know what this is.
We didn't really talk about Astro today.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is.
Azure Functions made the list. That was interesting on most write-ins.
That is, yeah.
Most commented feature. What feature received the most comments? Private fields for JavaScript, right? Because nothing is truly private.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it's probably people are like, WTF, this isn't really a thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
What is the most commented library?
React. Not shocked. Yeah. I wonder if we could just get a most commented and then we could do like sentiment analysis on the comments.
We don't have that
power, but we'd like to. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Angular and then Storybook for those as well. Interesting. So those were interesting. Cool.
Yeah. There's a very good wrap up that they have a conclusion where the director of engineering of web infrastructure at Google, Sarah Drasner, had something that she wrote up. JavaScript and TypeScript are more vibrant than ever. I mean, it's a good conclusion. it's kind of self-serving coming from somebody, I think, in the web space. I mean, you're going to say that that life is good and everything is trending upwards on JavaScript, so it's not too surprising there. But yeah,
yep. Oh well.
It's kind of like
it was good.
That'd be kind of like asking somebody is climate change real, and having a book that it says no and who's the forward by, but one of the CEOs of one of the big oil companies.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, right.
Surprise.
Yeah. Shocking.
This was fun. If you watch this whole thing and you're interested in JavaScript dev, if you stuck with us, you go to the conclusion side, go to the conclusion section of the survey, scroll to the bottom, plug in your email address about staying in touch with them so that you can get notified when the survey opens up again next year for the next survey. They don't spam you. They don't overload you with stuff. I've also joined their Discord. And they're really I don't get spammed by these guys. So they do a very, very respectful and good job of this.
100%.
I'm a big fan. So.
Yep. 100%. That was a really fun episode. And I'm really interested to see what our listeners and people who are watching this video think. I would love for people to comment and say whether they found it interesting or not, or helpful or not. Because, who knows? We don't want to do things that people aren't interested in. So please leave us a comment one way or the other, letting us know whether you thought this was useful or not. And absolutely, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe by smashing that subscribe button so that you'll get notified when we have new CloudDev Clarity episodes, browser native episodes, or Andrew puts out some new content. You're going to get to know all about that. And then, follow us. And we'll see you again with some more interesting episodes that talk about Microsoft 365 and Azure development topics. Thanks.